Thanks for coming to this conversation we're going to have today with Fanny Bauer Grung. And I'd like to talk a little bit about Fanny's experience. She's Norwegian origin, born in Paris, grew up in Rome. So I was wondering if I should say Fanny or Fanny?
Anything goes.
Anything goes, okay. And Fanny decided to study art history at the university in London. And then after she finished her degree, or I think before you finished your degree, you realized that you had a passion for architecture and wanted to study architecture. So she finished her degree in architecture and then, her degree in art history, and then decided to go and study architecture. Finished her degree in architecture. Had an amazing experience, even though it wasn't a very long one, but you had an amazing experience with the famous architectural firm. They're Norwegian from Oslo, Noheta. And then decided to move to Milan, where she would join the studio of Piero Lissoni, that does architecture products designs, as you know. And she met David, who became David Lopez Quincoces, who became her partner in life and in work. And I promise I won't ask any questions about that dynamic.
It's a long story.
We won't go into that. So we're here today to hear more about Fanny's experience as mostly focusing on interior design, even though the company does do also product design and architecture. And hopefully the goal or the aim of today's talk is to get some insight into, I want to call it the interior design craft, because I believe the work that Fanny does is really more of a craft than a profession. And hopefully give you some information that you will not be able to find on the internet. So some tidbits, and maybe some advice, some little nuggets that you can take away, because you will all be starting your careers, hopefully, after your experience here at Domus. Okay, so let's start. As a first question, since we know your CV and your experience, I just want to know, can you tell us something about yourself that we don't know or that we can't find online?
Well, as you know, as you can't find online and is obvious, I'm, like you said, Norwegian, but I grew up in Italy, so very Italian. David is my work and life partner. We have 2 kids, blah, blah, blah. Everything is pretty, sort of organized by now. Okay. So yeah, that's...
No, I was really interested when they asked me if I would be a moderator for this talk. I was particularly interested when I read about your background, because I have a similar background. I mean, not the Norwegian and that, but also I'm very mixed, as I think most of you know, because almost everybody here has been a student of mine. So you know I also come from a mixed background. Also in terms of professional, because I studied industrial design, I work as an interior designer, I have a father who's a structural engineer. So I'm really curious, how do you feel that your mixture of cultures and nationalities, and your mixture of background, because you studied art history and also architecture, how do you feel that has been hopefully a positive, and how do you feel that influenced the way you design and you work on your projects?
I think it's extremely important. I mean, it has had a huge impact on the work we do. There's a very strong design tradition in Scandinavia, and obviously a very strong one and a very strong history of interior design in Italy. And I think that comes out a lot in our work. Our work is heavily based on research. So obviously there's an aesthetic approach that's sort of innate, that's mine, and there's one that's David's, and he's Spanish, so that's the third one in the mix. It's all a bit European-centric, but I think it adds layers and layers to what you do, and it's been extremely influential in that sense. And even colors and textures and things you don't realize. I grew up in Rome, and Rome has very specific light and very specific colors, and I think that you tend to move in a similar direction, even though you don't realize it a lot of the time, and look for a certain atmosphere and warmth in projects that often come from influences that you've had as a kid. And it's important to look at that, because it will help you and it will guide you in the process to get sort of a clearer vision.
Okay. Tell me something. You mentioned the word research.
Yes.
That's an important word here at Domus. As you know, I'm often a project leader at Domus, and we promote how important research is in a project. So it's not only in a school project, but also in real life projects. So can you tell us a little bit about how you approach it? Because sometimes with students, they arrive and they're like, okay, how do we really go about this, doing the research and then presenting it or coming up with the concept? So can you elaborate a little bit on your method of how you do it to give them some tips on?
I think it's important to find what resonates with you in terms of an approach to a project, a general approach, and that takes a lot of time. And it's important. It started to settle for me when I was studying at Mendrisio at the Academy of Architecture, to have a sort of a starting point as an approach. So we do a lot of restoration. Right. And so for me, the architectural context is always extremely important. Right. So you start at the base with that, and then I research in through the time period where I'm working on the restoration, and use books rather than the internet is quite important.
The old-fashioned way.
Yes.
Why?
Because the internet is overwhelming, and I mean, obviously in everyday use, I use it all the time, and we use all types of programs, and from Pinterest to Instagram or whatever. But books will give you a stronger backbone if you really learn to identify your own language. And so if you learn through books, it will be a more solid way of expressing yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if I look back through archives that have a very specific guideline of bigger architects or designers of the past, I think it will make my own language more specific and better for the future, rather than being bombarded with things on Pinterest, you know, where there are too many trends and there are too many things going on. And you get influenced too easily. It will give you a purer and clearer vision. Yeah. The concept, I mean, is a different thing. You have to develop a language and something that makes sense to you and the client. But you know, I work with context, so then I can weave the concept into that base already, and it will be easier than to put a frame to the project that I'm doing, a conceptual frame.
Okay. No, I really appreciate what you said about books, because of course, when I started working, it was before internet, but we won't tell anyone. and yeah, we had to get books. We had to scan books and images, but I think there's a different level of depth. Yes. As you said, and it's not bombarded by too much information, and you can focus. So I think that's a good balance that you're managing to do both. Okay, and then you mentioned the concepts. How? Because I've seen in my experience working on hotel projects, especially on larger projects. I know you do a lot of residential and also now more hotels and restaurants. I find on larger projects we sometimes start with a concept, and then it somehow gets diluted along the way, just because the nature of the project is so large and we get more people on board. So I always find we have to sort of pull in the reins. Yes. And make sure that we're coherent with the project from A to Z. Can you tell me a little bit about how your experience with that?
Depends how good you are at managing your client, I guess.
Sorry?
It depends a little bit on how good you are at managing the client as well, because. Right. You know, there's a lot of, we as designers and architects, we have a lot of input and visual input, but so does the client. And I feel you go off-piste very easily when everybody involved starts going in different directions, right. You know? So then to pull the reins back in and focus on what the original idea was also is very codependent on how you manage the client, and they're wandering around and, you know, getting lost in the internet or other things. How we stay, you know, I try always to go back and, you know, every revision that we do with the team and interior vision within our own team, sort of to remind everyone, okay, so what was the brief, what was the concept, what was the idea here, and is this coherent or not? Do we need to scrap this idea or not, you know? It's okay to sometimes go a little over certain ends, but I agree with you, the project would always be stronger if you stay coherent to the very start, because once you start diluting it too much, there are too many influences, and then you don't have a language, you know. And it doesn't have to be my language. Like, I don't believe in the idea that we as an office need to do only us. It's not about us. It's about, if I'm doing somebody's home, it's their home, you know. And so it's not about how what I want it to look like. It's how you tell their story through our perspective, you know. So it's it's important to have that dialogue. It's just not important to change idea completely, because then you start mixing different puzzles and it doesn't make sense.
And it dilutes the project. Yeah. Okay. You spoke about the client. I like what you said about being, you know, driven by what your client wants, because I find that a lot of people in the profession don't do that, and they go on their own design style or conviction of what they want, and they sometimes lose track of what the client wants. So having had also a previous conversation with you, you told me how important it was to understand your client. So can you and I call it design empathy also, yes. You know, so how can you, how do you go about that in creating the type of relationship with your client, and being understanding when at times it must be difficult too?
Yes.
Okay.
I laugh because I do that, David. You know, we work as a team,
right.
But I mostly do that part.
You're the psychologist in the yes. couple. Okay. Okay.
Which is not funny at all.
No.
It's a tiring aspect.
Okay.
But it's great because you get a lot of dialogue going. Mm-hmm. But of course, you're steering the wheel. You know, you're steering the car, so you have to guide them, but you also have to leave space. I think it's important to tell stories with interior design, which is different than doing scenography. So I don't believe in doing scenography as interior design, which has become very trendy. So I put up a scenography that looks great in pictures, but then when I look at the detailing and the proportions, and it doesn't work. And it's a road that interior design is taking very quickly and very dangerous. So I believe in interior design done well to tell a story, whether it's a restaurant that has a story to tell and momentums when you live it, or whether it's somebody's home and you're telling their story. And to have that empathy is you really need to train yourself a bit, you know. So obviously some people are more social than others, introverts, extroverts, whatever, that's fine. I'm definitely more than David, so it's more natural that I tend to talk with the clients more. But you also have to I think it's important to stay grounded. Like, people from our team always ask me, like, how are you not more agitated about this? Or how are you not more upset? And I said, I'm not operating anyone, I'm not doing open heart surgery here. Like, we're talking very luxurious, high budget homes or hotel, like it's something very nice. Right. So, and you give a little and you win a little, it's a give and take. And it's important to really listen and to get to know them first. Every project that we've done where I didn't get the chance to know the client first went badly compared to the ones where we sat down together, we had a meal, or we discussed, and they showed me what they like. It's extremely important they show me a mood board before I show mine. Okay. So I get a sense of their language and of how how they see the world, Right.
Yeah, that's active listening, and that's a really important part, especially as we're moving on to the AI age, right? And so far, what we know is the difference between AI and us is the human emotion. So far, then one day that might change. We don't know. So I really think that the human aspect is fundamental, and also how you build a relationship with your client. Yes. I always say it's like a marriage. I mean, you already have one, but then you have another marriage, right, with your clients. Yes. Because you build, the projects take generally a few years. Yes. And it's important to keep a good relationship, because if not, it's going to become a nightmare.
Yes. To this day, we've never really fought with anyone, except if they really did something horrendous. But and I think even if you don't agree in the end, like I said, you win some and you lose some, and something's got to give somewhere. It's important to stay, David is very good at this, to staying put and, convincing. He's the expert, ultimately. So you're asking me for advice, so I need to give that. Mm-hmm. But you need to give, with that, you need to give security. I mean, that's one aspect that people, I think, underestimate. So with the client, so I listen and I guide and I do the whole, he gives a lot of security because it's yes or no, but you need to back it up with knowledge. But you need to give firm answers always, I think that's important, so that they know that, okay, you're convinced about this, and it's right. I like 3 things. Which one do you prefer? For me, it's the same. Well, this one, not, well, it could be this or it could be that, and that's a mess.
No, you're right. Actually, I like the word you use, security. It's about trust.
Yes.
And of course, you're attracted and trust people who seem sure of themselves.
Yes.
And not to the point of being arrogant that they're not flexible, but to the point where they can explain. No, I think that's a really important aspect, is flexibility, but then bringing the design around to your language. Because I remember when I started in my career, and the first times clients asked me to make a big change, and I was like, no. I was really inside. Outside, I had to play cool, but inside, I was really nervous about it. And then when I forced myself, I realized you can find this happy compromise between what they want and your language, right? Because I think that's the goal, is to come to a compromise. You can't do something that's completely foreign.
Yes.
Right?
No, of course, you can't alienate. That's not the point. Usually, if they come to you, there's a sort of coherent interest, or, in same aesthetic somewhere that you can land on. Sometimes you're extremely lucky and you're totally aligned, client, and it's happened to me very rarely, but when it does happen, it's, but it's so to the point where you don't need to discuss anything, it's like, this is, yes.
And then that's great, okay. So speaking of that, since you've worked now on quite a few projects with the firm, tell me a positive surprise that happened to you during a project, something you weren't expecting. And I won't ask you the opposite question of a negative one, because then we won't finish in time. So only a positive. Tell me something positive that was a surprise to you on a project.
Well, when we did our gallery, 6 Gallery, for example, it was sort of just a fun, the 2 years that we had it running in the space that we don't have now, but we will open again somewhere else soon. The response, it was something that we did for ourselves. It was just sort of for fun to,
like a hobby?
Yeah, to put together. We didn't have kids at the time, so it was easier to have a hobby.
Life is easier before.
But it was sort of, we had a lot of furniture. We had a lot of things that we did for clients, and we wanted to just put it together, sort of like an atelier where and the response was, it was done very simply. And the response was enormous, So the return, you don't have to do something huge to get back something very big. That was a surprising aspect. It was, it took 4 months of making that ceiling, by hand. But that's that was part of the simplicity. We did it, our team. We were 4 or 5 people, and at the time doing it every evening. But the feedback was very big.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about this? Because one thing is your studio, right?
Yes.
Quintosis Drago, and then you have the gallery called 6 Gallery, which you curate. Can you explain a little bit what the philosophy is behind the gallery?
Yes, so we have an architectural office, like you said, that do interiors, both commercial and private. And we have 6 Gallery it's not a design gallery per se, because I don't feel like a curator. But with time, when you do interior design, you end up accumulating, furniture for your clients, and you do a lot of research, and you find something, and you get obsessive over something, and you buy it even though you shouldn't, and things like that happens a lot. And so over time, we put it together, and we realized we could, also show this somehow, and we draw collections for our clients, obviously, because even though the world is packed with furniture, often you can't find the exact right piece for that space, which is absurd, but it's true.
Very true.
So by doing a lot of that, then we had a collection, and so we decided to launch it. I think the first one was in 2018. And now it's we don't have a space, it's offline, but we still sell and create collections regularly for clients and collect design pieces and so forth, restore them, reupholster them, and do.
And of course, you insert them in a lot of your projects,
And a lot of our
especially
projects,
the residential
yes.
projects.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Can you also tell me, I know you're particularly interested in materials, fabrics, the artwork, the styling. Can you elaborate a little bit on that aspect of the work and how you divide the work in the studio with David?
So even though I studied more architecture specifically than David, he's a better architect than me, I think.
That's humble.
Yeah, well, it's true.
It's true.
It's
Okay,
true.
good. You're realistic. Okay.
So he's particularly gifted at drawing, basically. So whether it's very small scale, by hand, or just thinking an object or thinking a detail. And I mean particularly like at a very obsessive level of detail, and a very intricate, detailed sense of proportion and things. So he's much better at dividing up the space than I am. It's not that I don't know how to do it. It's like way better. And drawing objects, he's a product designer as well. So I feel like, but I work from gut instinct. So I feel like that's a good mix. So I work, when we get a project, we work together, brainstorming generally, then he will start looking at the space, how it works best, and sort of the concept of the space. Right. And then I work on gut feelings, sort of, but this works well like this and that, and I start putting the materials together to dress the space. Right. And I mean, I think that's the one thing that's worked out, while we're still together. We're still together. Have an office together.
Each of you are
and then obviously I critique his work and he critiques mine. And that's what makes it better in the end. It's very useful to have a work partner.
Yeah, but in reality, in my experience also working, usually design is divided like that. There's somebody who's more, on the spatial and the layouts, and somebody who's more on the, let's say, dressing it up, or decorative side. I was more on the spatial side. Of course, I could do everything because I had to, but definitely there are a lot of people who can do it, a lot better. Often I see this, especially in hotels, we often divide between the two. But I imagine you give your input too, right? I mean, on the layouts.
Of course. And he does very much so on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, of course, very much so.
Okay.
On what I do. So it's not that we don't step into each other's areas. But I think you have very little time, even though projects take a long time, you have very little time between deadlines. So it's a waste of time to try and override somebody that you, in the end, believe do a better job than you, And the deadlines are tight and the time is little, and you have to think of all the process, the concept, everything, deliver on time, do it well. So it's better to just, divide it.
Yeah, it's always like whenever you start a project or you sign a project, it's always late.
Yes.
Right? You start off and you're late.
Yes.
So you have to get used to that aspect of it. Very rarely do clients come ahead of time and give you all the time, and especially the design part, you have to compact it because then you have all the construction drawings and the details and all that aspect of the work.
Which is a shame because if you were to have more time in the concept, it would always be a little bit better. Like I always feel like you could do a little bit more with a bit more time, but that's not how it works. So you just need to suck it up and go. Okay. So the characteristic of your projects, what ties them all together is the level of luxury, correct? Right. I mean, all your projects are high-end level of luxury. How have you seen, my experience of working, I've seen huge changes in this idea and concept of luxury. I want to know your opinion and what you've seen so far, and especially how do you think things will evolve in terms of, Thank goodness we're moving away from the simple connotation of luxury,
the gold and
shiny and, which is anything but luxurious in my humble opinion. I think people are more and more aware of the most luxurious thing today is time. Right. So even time to draw and develop, sit down and dedicate time to the project, whether it's a home or a commercial project, because it's in the time that you develop the best detail, So our projects are very rich in detail, which is obviously very expensive and therefore luxurious, but it's not necessarily, it's not rich in luxury in that typical sense. And I think that that's where the world of luxury is going, if that makes any sense of what you said. So it doesn't need to be expensive, but it needs to be well done. which very often is expensive in a way, but it's not in that obvious sense. So to move away from the typical.
Right. And tell me something, the details, when you talk about details, that aspect of it, do you work together with David, or is it more once the project, you're on board, are you looking more at the details? Because, I mean, a project can be make or break according to the details, right? Yes. So, when we're in school, you guys have a very short amount of time, so it's really the superficial aspect, I mean, the top layer, not superficial, sorry, that's the wrong word. Scrap that, sorry, not superficial. The top aspect. But then there's the whole development of all the details. And that's a huge aspect, and a huge amount of time goes into that.
Yes.
So how does that work in your studio in terms of the input for the details?
It's strict.
It's strict.
I mean, I saw the other day the carpenter working with one of our project managers, and they were going through detailed drawings. So we do, I don't know, 2,000 drawings per project or something. For residential.
2,000?
Yeah, something like that.
Are they this big or A1 size? Or A0 size?
No, A3, like a book of...
2,000? We do like 500 for a whole hotel.
No.
Oh my God, okay.
And the carpenter and the project manager were arguing because he kept saying, nobody's going to notice if it's 7 millimeters or 5 millimeters, the carpenter. Okay. And the project manager kept saying, trust me that David will see it from 20 meters away as soon as he walks into this room, and it will be a
with
problem.
With his eyes closed,
yes,
right?
Exactly. And it will be a problem. So we supervise the detail. I mean, sometimes I think it doesn't help us in the sense in today's market to be so obsessive over the detail is difficult, and it's time.
Economically, it probably doesn't help.
It's not great, and our team is fed up, of course. But even though everything else is, I think they're happy with everything else. But with David's obsessive, millimeter. We draw in millimeters, everything.
Of course,
so.
Yeah, we do too. Yeah.
They get frustrated, but the carpenter gets frustrated or whatever. In the end, everybody turns out really happy, though. And the control of all the drawings is very specific. So no drawing comes out of the office that hasn't been checked by David.
And do you do
and me, but
okay? And you do your technical drawings, and then you get shop drawing done.
Yes.
Definitely. Okay.
From our suppliers.
Okay.
And then we recontrol them.
Yeah.
And then
that's fundamental, because in Italy, for example, we're spoiled. I mean, out of all the countries in the world, the level of craftsmanship is very high in Italy.
Yes.
If we work in North America compared,
I worked in Miami.
Exactly. So the level is very high here, and when I first came and I worked here, I was surprised how the suppliers, the manufacturers would tell me, you don't have to do detailed drawings, we'll do shop drawings. I say, yeah, but how do you know what my design is if I don't do the drawings? Which is true. Technically, you wouldn't have to do it because they're good. But if you have your idea of how you want the detail to be done, you have to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important when we're talking about the level of luxury.
Yes.
It's really in the details, and it's not the flashy neon lights, gold sign, but it's the details.
And the layering is,
Okay. Yeah, talk to me about the layering. That's a very...
the layering of details, materials, and materials put together, and then the furniture, it's different steps. I think it's important to start with the furniture immediately, which almost never happens, but it's important because the story that you're trying to tell, if you don't do well with the furniture, it collapses very quickly. And that's hard when you start out because your client not always will have the budget for, particular furniture. Furniture is really expensive, great furniture.
Are you talking about custom-made furniture?
No, I'm talking about off-shelf or vintage or whatever. Okay. But even a good, solid chair today is expensive, So that's very tricky in the beginning. And then eventually that's gotten easier because our clients might collect or they might, do specific purchases. But it's layering all these aspects together and making them stay coherent and, following through every detail. Never lower your guard, because that's where then the trouble comes.
Trouble comes. But tell me something, do you often custom made, in let's say in the residential context, does it happen that you custom make some furniture specifically for that project?
Yes, a lot.
Yeah. Like what type of, I mean, even like a sofa or?
Yeah, today we drew like 5 pieces of 2 consoles and a chest of drawers and,
Okay. Because in the residential context, of course, the price is very high because it's one. Because in hotels, we do a lot.
Of course,
because we have the repetition. If you have 200 rooms and you design it, you have a quantity of 200. So it's very different. Speaking about that dynamic between residential and hotels, in your experience so far with hotels, or do you think you'll be able to keep that level of quality because it's a totally different scale and a totally different budget?
Yes.
So the mindset...
It's hard. It's harder, of course. You do less custom. I mean, now we do... It depends. I mean, if you look at the restaurant there, the Dover, which was extremely layered, and there's a lot of custom, wood panelings and tons of details, but it's a one-off, very specific little jewel restaurant for our clients. So in hotels, obviously, it's difficult. So you need to pull in a little bit of scenography, not too much, to make sure that you give the special effect, but compromise on where you can't overdo with a custom, of course.
Or you have to balance it, like for example, obviously presidential suite usually has a very different budget, which is more similar probably to residential than that. When you're doing your residential projects, do you have a conversation about budget ahead of time? Like
At the very beginning.
Okay, yeah. And that's fundamental. I mean, I'm asking you
better
because...
stay higher than what you think,
Yeah.
I like to go way over and rather, which never happens, go,
Never go down.
Never spend less than the other way around and try to wing it and say it will probably... and go on the cheap end, because it will never be on the cheap end. It will always be more expensive.
Right. And also, I mean, if you're not realistic with the budget, then you have
a huge problem for
of
the
course,
clients.
Because then if you present your designs and the budget is here and they're here, I often say a lot of clients, they want a 5-star hotel with a 3-star budget. We have a conversation and they say, I want a 5-star hotel. I said, what's the budget? And the budget is 3-star. I said, I haven't learned how to do miracles yet.
No, of course.
So you have to balance it. So I think that's also quite different between the residential and hotels.
Yes.
I think another difference, just to speak about this dynamic, is the complexity. Yes. When I was doing hotel design, once in a while we'd have some residential projects and we always went, no, it's more complicated to do a home often than a hotel.
Yes.
Because of the
There's a lot of emotions involved.
Well, because the people are going to live there.
Yes.
And any mistake you make, they're going to see it every day.
Yes.
Can you tell us your experience a little bit about that?
You get really intimate with people, a lot more than I was expecting. I've had clients,
their underwear drawer, like
everything in and out. I've had a client ask me once, I want separate bedroom for my partner, but I don't want them to know. Like, okay, how am I going to navigate this,
Has to be a different partner
or
a different house.
I don't know how to deal with that, but you get all their phobias and all their dreams and, and there's so much emotion involved. And there's a very big difference between a first-time homemaker and a second-time homemaker. Huge.
Okay.
Because their approach to a construction site is completely different.
Okay. So they've learned something along the way, hopefully.
So whenever I get a fresh one, I'm like, okay.
Now we're going to start at zero.
Yes. So we better lay out all the issues first to make it very clear that some things will drive them insane, like that the batiscopa,
the skirting.
Baseboard,
the skirting
is extremely expensive compared to what they expect,
Okay.
Or that the faucets are going to be way over their comprehension of budget. And then when they enter the house, nothing will work, And every client has come back to me and said, thank you so much for telling me and preparing me, because I now remember that you did say that something was going to go wrong, there wasn't going to be hot water or the air conditioning, It's not a new car, it's a new house, and the two things are very different. So I think it's best to set them up for failure. Yes, exactly.
So they're not too disappointed.
Yes.
Okay, what about couples therapy? Because I'm sure you act as a couple therapist.
Yes.
I mean, or has it happened that couples are really on the same page and they agree on the project, or one is secretly telling you, no, I want green, and the other one is...
Yes, that happens all the time. The easiest is when one of them tends to, delegate to the other, because then there's less friction, there's less competition, there's less drama.
Remember that, guys, if ever you do a project,
Yes.
delegate. Usually the men usually have to delegate to the women, right? Or not?
I don't know. Okay. It's very subjective. But you have to smear yourself with so much patience and just let them talk. I just let them talk and pull it all out, all the frustrations and what they like and don't like and their problems in life. You end up talking about the dog and the cat and the sister and the whatever, and you sit there and you're thinking, okay, I have 5 deadlines tonight. But sure, let's do one more coffee about the dog, And,
I think they should have psychology courses in design.
Yeah.
Because you have it on the residential side, which is the most, but even in the hotel industry, as you know too, because there's so many different players.
Yes.
And, I tell you guys also, you have to be diplomatic. You have to learn about diplomacy, patience.
Yes.
Huge, which helps now that you have small kids too,
Exactly.
right? It plays off each other. Okay, let's see how we're doing for time. Okay, we have time for a couple of more questions, and then we're going to ask our lively audience here for a little bit of input. Okay, $1 million question, which I've been asked 1 million times, and I hated when I was asked this question, so now I'm going to ask you.
Thank you.
You're in an interview with a potential client for a
Yes.
fantastic project. And they're talking to a couple of different firms. And they say to you, Fanny, tell us why we should hire you. And what are you going to give me that's different from A, B, and C firm?
David.
Okay, on a silver platter.
Yes.
Okay.
No. I think, like I mentioned earlier, the world of interior design is, like everything else, changing quickly. And you have accessibility to images and styles and trends that come and go very fast. Right. And there's a lot of people coming out that are really good at doing scenography. Right. And we don't do scenography. Scenography crumbles very fast when you look at the detailing. There's always something that's a little off. The proportion or something doesn't quite fit. Overall, it looks great. It's convincing. It sets a mood. It's great in photos.
It's Instagram.
And then when you go into the space itself, it doesn't work.
Right.
And we don't do that, which makes the work a lot more painful, I think, for us, because it's based all on proportion, dimension, drawing, a million times. And it's a lot more laborious than what I know or see. Maybe some other people do that are smarter, I think, in the business momentarily, but on the long run, it doesn't pay back. Sure. So what I say is, I think you could get a lot of people that do something similar to what we do and similar type of, but in the end, the quality comes through when you live the space, and I give the credit for that to David.
Okay. So it's about the substance.
Yes.
Okay. I understand when you use the word scenography, but can you maybe explain? Because I think it would be good just to explain exactly what you intend when you use that word.
So very simply, if you do a home that turns out very well.
Photograph?
No, where the walls are white and it's detailed and it's filled with atmosphere and emotion, but the walls are white, you're doing a lot less scenography than if you use 5 different colors, for example.
Okay.
I am all pro color, it's not that. But if it stands in white, it will stand in any color that you put it. If you smear it with darker colors, etc., and moody, or you follow a very trend of very wabi-sabi or whatever, it's not sure that then it will stand the test of time, because it creates an atmosphere before creating the substance. Does that make sense? So a white cube that's done really well will work better than scenography. When I see projects where didn't really know how to solve this detail, so I made it really dark, and it's moody and it feels great. That's a very it solves the problem at the moment, but not long run.
What about the idea of, the two-dimensional, the image, the photograph?
Yes.
Because how many times has it happened that you see a space photographed and it looks fantastic, and you go to the real space and it's not the same thing?
So that's, for example, darker spaces or very sort of moody spaces tend to photograph really well.
Right.
And you can't really see the details maybe or the proportions of things, and then when you go there, not really. So you need to create something that has layer and proportion, like I keep talking about, and where you test the materials very well.
Right.
And you're sure that when all put together, it will stand the test of time.
And that you live the space.
Yes.
That you don't rely on images
Yes.
in 2D.
Yes.
I had an ex-student who was going for an important job interview in London a few years ago, and she asked me advice. She said, I'm going to interview with this famous firm. What should I do? And I said, well, do you know their projects? Oh, yeah, I saw them on. I said, where? Oh, online. I said, but most of them are in London. Did you go see the spaces? No, I saw them online.
It's very different.
I said, I wouldn't hire you just based on that.
Yeah, of course.
Right? So the reality, because you guys are the Google generation, right, that grew up with that, but the reality of feeling a space, the volumes, the proportion, the feel of the materials and the colors is completely different when you're actually living it.
Yes.
And no, I think that's a really good reply, because as you said, there's so many, there's a lot of competition, of course.
That's changed a lot.
I think a lot more now than a couple of decades ago. And so it's more of a challenge for the new generation to rise above and have an edge over the competition. But I think what you were talking about is this level of substance is fundamental. And it might not be something that's immediately obvious, but it's obvious when people live the space and go. And,
yes. I think it's confusing in our work. Some things are much more contemporary, some are more, old school, and people sort of say, what's your style and whatever. I'm like, I work with the context, so that changes. But what stays is always the detail, the drawing, and you can see the coherence between different type of projects if you look at that.
Okay. What about future scenarios? I mean, how do you think now this is what we're living now, but with the coming of AI and things moving faster with technology, and how do you foresee this profession going? I know it's another $1 million question in the next 10, 20 years, when these people will be sitting here giving their experience about their work. Do you have any insight or any intuition on what?
I hope it will move in a much more sustainable fashion.
Of course.
We were really behind, really behind. So there needs to be a major switch in how we make homes and public projects. So I hope that will be sort of a trend, which has nothing to do with aesthetics. So I would like to see, I have a client for a hotel that's particularly, thank goodness, concerned about sustainability and use of materials. And I always tell them, could we please move away from the idea that something to be sustainable, it needs to be like rough wood and a white wall. Sustainability needs to come into every aesthetic language that there is. Right. And it doesn't need to look wabi-sabi, which I think is wonderful and it's a great aesthetic and whatever. To be sustainable, we need to make sure that a lacquered table is somehow sustainable, but it's, So I hope that will be one route it goes down.
Authentic. Sorry, because there's so much.
Yeah, authentic. Yeah, no greenwashing. Right? I mean, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that it's.
Yes, really. So, I think there's a very strong mix between sort of fashion and design, which has its positive aspects and negative aspects. Fashion is stronger, it dilutes design quickly. You can see it in Salone, it's changed a lot, But it can also be helpful. Now people create, this has always happened, identity through clothing is easier and faster, but also through their homes, and it's become more personalized. So that's an interesting language that people can really create unique aesthetic experiences with their homes and so forth. and it will grow a lot more. But for the rest, I mean, AI terrifies me, so
Terrifies you. Well, I think you have an edge because you spoke a lot about the human aspect.
Yeah.
So
Hopefully that will help me.
Until you retire,
Yes.
hopefully you'll be okay, and then God knows what will happen after that. Okay, let's do one last question here, and then we're going to ask our audience for some questions for Fanny. If you could give a word of advice, or two or three,
Yes.
to this generation that are slowly, surely going to finish their degree and start in the real world working, what advice? Or if you could give yourself when you were beginning your career, if you could go back and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
Probably don't rush. Don't focus. So when you do something, focus. This is what I would tell myself. Okay. Learn really well what you're doing at that point and build on that. So don't rush through to get to a finish line quicker. I did a lot of very fast. I did my bachelor's in 2 years instead of 3, and I did a lot of that sort of running. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think you learn more. You see more, but you don't learn more. So it's important to do what you're doing well, really well, have a solid base and build on that. Don't waste time. Don't mess about. So be focused, but do it in the due time that you have. No rushing and trying to do a million things. Which is hard
today in the world that we're living in, right? Because everything is happening so much faster.
Which is why I think that's an important thing to remember.
Okay, but you still have to follow your deadlines, right?
Yeah,
of course. I'm sure you don't tell this to your young collaborators in the office.
Okay. No, but you learn by doing, that's important. So that's why you have to focus when you're learning and take it in.
Right.
I've had people in the office sort of always say but it wasn't my fault. And it's it's not, I don't care whose fault it is. I care that you learn so that next time we don't have to go through this again, and nobody's here to blame. Like I said, nobody's doing open heart surgery here. So it's fine, sort of. But it just, make sure that we're learning from this and really understanding,
Yeah, that was my experience when I started working. I said, I feel like I was on a giant staircase, and university school gave me the first step, and then learning by doing, especially before when we were talking about details.
Yes.
We had technical classes in school and you learn something, but you really learn by talking to the carpenter, by talking to the marble guy, and that's how you learn. Or you learn from people with more experience in the office who have done these details many times, and it's fundamental.
You have to focus on it. You have to want to push yourself to the next step.
Yeah.
So, I always talk about David, but because he mostly does that. When you see the architect and the supplier arguing over who knows how to do the detail best by using the right tool in the machine, I always say, okay, fine, you're in great hands. I can leave the room, because that's
another
really
level.
Pushing it.
Right.
And that's where the good comes out.
Right. Okay.
Where you excel.
Good. Okay. So we have some time left, right? We're okay with time? Yeah? Okay. Put the watch on specially today so we wouldn't go over. So let's have some questions for Fanny on anything you want clarified, question, anything. Valeria.
Yes. Thank you for your talk, first of all, and all the advices.
Oh.
That was really helpful. Thank you. And my question is, do you have a favorite project of yours? And if you do, why it's standing out from others?
It's a good question.
Your own home. No.
No.
Those are the harder ones.
Yes. or not. Well, now at this moment, I'm very attached to the Dover, which is a restaurant we just finished in Mayfair in London. It gets emotional with the client. So the client has become a very good friend, and we're working on many projects together. He's very particular. And we had we wanted to do the same thing, so a very classical place, and we agreed on everything. And I get also very obsessed with details. So from the fork to the spoon to the glass to the, and it all went very straightforward. And we followed the red line from beginning to end. And so it closed really nicely. And we were there, David and I had never had dinner there. We went last month, and when you walk into something you've done, and it's populated with people, and the candles are on, and the music, and it's very special. So that was very nice, yeah.
You have to keep those precious, because it's not always easy to find that type of syntony with a client where...
Absolutely. So that's very, very unique.
Okay, good.
Not letting him go.
So hopefully he'll do...
Yes, no, we're working on
already
two other hotels.
Oh, fantastic, yeah. Because that's always the best clients, are what we call repeat clients. Once you've established a good relationship with a client, and they trust you and you trust them, and everything is so much easier. As you mentioned earlier, right? The fact that when you you work again with the same people, your learning curve is already further ahead. Okay, any other questions?
We have a couple online. I don't know if you want to give priority because one of them arrived like 20 minutes ago.
One arrived, 10 minutes ago?
20 minutes ago.
Before the talk? One arrived before the talk? Okay, so let's if they're in a hurry, let's do that one. Take it slow. Okay.
We have a couple of them. Hello, first of all. Thank you for sharing the insights on residential design experience, but what are your thoughts on the role of neuroscience in interior design, and how can it enhance the creation of spaces that truly resonate with inhabitants and on a deeper level?
That was a really hard one.
That's a hard
I know
one.
who asked that question too. Neuroscience, meaning the psychology of space and how people feel. Yeah. I know who asked the question.
So reinterpret the question, Marina, for me.
Well, I think it's Marilina, right?
I don't know.
Anyway,
I cannot
it's
read
a student who's very interested. She studied. She's Brazilian, and she studied neuroscience of space. So basically the psychology of space. Yes. And it's also been something I've been interested in. I did a couple of lectures with the students, basically how space makes us feel.
Yes.
And I think we all design intuitively.
Yes.
But how do we bring it to a level where we're more conscious about how to go about a project, thinking of how the space will make the users feel?
So, there's a very large gap here between residential then and commercial, right? So if you're designing a public space, architecture will influence tremendously a group of people and how they interact and how they feel with the space. In a residential space, you need to get to know your client.
Right.
So I think it's extremely important. There's, I always take an example of the airport in Oslo, which has a waved ceiling, which a lot of airports do, but and obviously it's in Norway, so it's wood, cladded, etc. And the warmth and the tranquility that gives, sort of the shape, leads into the airport, which is a place loaded of anxiety, mainly, is extremely significant. So you can, and I graduated with Irish Mateos at university, and they work a lot on that, sort of the impact of shape, actually, on how you feel. Sure. And light and shape, obviously, are two main aspects. And I think it's extremely important when you work in anything, residential or whether it's architectural. In residential, there's so many layers of personal responses to space. So then you have to work really tightly with your client to understand what their anxieties are, what their preoccupations are, what they feel good in, what they don't feel good in, and how they feel welcomed. And I feel like if you cocoon them, like if you really make them feel understood, that will reflect ultimately in how they live the space. Right. It's often restoration, so you're working with certain guidelines, like you can't do crazy shapes or different things. But it's important. It's key. I don't know if that answers the question, but
I think so. Yeah. Okay. Can we ask a live question for people who are here? Okay, Marcella. Then after we'll get to you.
Okay. So looking at interior and architecture, you can see in your design there is a timeless design, a temporary where you can you can say it's too old, it's so new. So like what elements you use that you have to use in the spaces to be able to create this balance and narrative between the old space you are restoring and the new elements you are adding to the space?
It's a good question as well. Good questions. So it depends on the context, of course, what type of building you're dealing with. I think that in apartments where you're restoring an apartment, so mostly residential, a good concept to keep in mind is that on the frame you restore and you bring back what was there and you apply it to detailing around the house, but inside the box itself you can work slightly more contemporary and you give that new twist, which means that when we restore an apartment we usually demolish everything. They tend to be very, very old and need serious maintenance. But we always bring back the old door frames, the old windows, in Milan, for example, I mean, where it fits. If it's a new build, no. But so you'll see old framing that's actually new, but it's hand painted, so it will give that same patina, and that is the outdoor structure. But the kitchen or the wardrobes will definitely have a much more contemporary feel. And if you do a good overlap of those, they will flow together and it will feel sort of timeless. And the reason why I'm interested in that is because it's much more sustainable. So it will not age as badly as a very rough intervention into an apartment that's, where the windowsills and everything is very strong. And I want a house to last like 50 years, at least.
Despite your business interest, because you rather have them renovate. No, but I think that's important. And also, that type of approach to an interior gives a lot more of a homey feeling.
Yes,
you want people to feel comfortable, right, in an interior.
Yeah.
So sometimes when you see a very slick, high-tech interior, but I see that the work that you do are spaces that are inviting and that are conducive to making people feel.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Okay. Nutsa?
Hi. I have a question about the connection between the concept and the design.
Yes.
Coming from myself, because I'm just stepping my foot into this industry, I find it a bit struggle to come down, when I come down to a really good concept, then to connect it to a good design. So the design showing the concept that I have worked on.
Yes.
And if you have any advice on how to...
Well, the more you do, the easier it gets.
So by the time you're 80,
No.
it's really good.
No, but it's true that with practice, also creativity is a muscle, So this is not the question you asked, but the more you work and the more creative output you get, the easier it becomes to do it and next time. To transform a concept into good design, you also have to, I think it's important to know very well what you like and look at the rules of perhaps what people have done in the past, and that can guide you to see like, okay, I really like this and how this works, and it appeals to me, not because it's a trend or something I saw yesterday, but because in all the things I look at, this is sort of the style that I like. And it works with my idea because it's my idea and it's my style, and the two will go together. And the more you develop and practice, the easier it will be to glue those two together. Which won't help you for like the next project, but actually
for the one after. No, I agree. But I do find that if you come up with a good concept, it's a lot easier then to translate it into the design.
Yes.
So sometimes if you're struggling between the concept and the design, maybe the concept is not spot on. I don't know. I mean, it's my personal.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think when you get it on, it's a lot easier. Things just flow. But you're right. It's a muscle. It's like anything. The more practice, the more you do, the better you become at it.
Yeah.
So, okay. There was another question. Okay, Puna, and then we'll go in the back. Okay, go.
What is the main key?
Oh, wait.
What
Try and
is the
speak
main
up.
key factor to get to know the client at the personal level as a designer? Like every clients are different. So what is one key factor that you apply everywhere, like every time to get in touch with that client into personal level?
Yes.
Go on a date.
Yeah, I do.
No, I'm joking.
No, I do.
She speed dates.
Questions you ask them to get to know more like what they are thinking for their house or their like commercial spaces.
Yeah. I try to make them feel comfortable by asking also. Being informal, I think, always wins over being formal and distant. So, try and break the ice and ask them, like, what was your last trip? Where did you go on holiday? Was there a hotel you liked? Was there something else you liked? Is there a designer you like? Can you bring me a magazine of something that you prefer? Do you have a friend who has an amazing house? Like, what does it look like? Blah, blah. How would you want to feel? And sometimes the answers are so abstract, you're like, okay, I didn't get anything of that whatsoever, I want to feel like I'm walking on stone, but it's, wood. I'm like, that doesn't exist, and I'm not putting aggress in there.
I can't do miracles.
So, but eventually, you get a feeling. What are your interests? I recently had a client that I knew meditation was very important to them, and already that will tell you many things. He wanted a meditation room in the house, and that will guide you already sort of in one direction. And another one, he loves clubbing, and so that will guide me somewhere else. And
So this is important, like to interview every member of the family.
I think it helps. I think it's important to figure out who really pulls the strings and like has the decisions soon enough. But it becomes quite obvious when they sit down and start talking, like who decides most. But between husband and wife, or wife and wife, or husband and whatever floats their boat. But it's also good to have like a one-on-one with them, and then together, and maybe I suggest, let's go look at things together. That's something I often do. Like, let's go to galleries, and then they will point out what they like. And then I'll do it with one of the two, if it's two people, so.
Does the dog ever have a say in
No,
the dog house, the design of the dog house? Okay.
There's a sink for the washing of the dog and like entrance.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You see, you have to design the house differently when you have.
Yes.
And the kids, at what age do they get to make decisions? What's the youngest?
Too early.
Too early?
Too early. I'm like, I don't want to know what an 8-year-old has to say on this fabric. They're going to change their mind in like 3 months. That's what I did,
And you'll spit all over it. And
Yeah.
feel dirty my fabric.
They get their say.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So my question is more about the industry.
Yes?
So I want to know, or if you have any tips on how you maintain your work-life balance.
Sorry?
Your work-life balance.
I don't know. I think it's hard because you don't become an architect or a designer unless you're very passionate about it, or if you do, that's a really bad choice.
Exactly.
Because it's a very overwhelming profession.
Yeah.
And it's always, So I think that I started to do interior design because I just wanted to make great houses for myself that I couldn't. So then I ended up doing it for other people, I also work with my husband. He's my main partner. So obviously it's hard, but it's a plus because then you build a whole, life out of your work as well. It is key to put some separations, and it's very important to stop your clients at a certain point because they will be all over at all times, texting you whenever, So now, on weekends, I have small children. I can't receive. We have 40 construction sites at the moment, which means there are 2 people per construction site, at least, if not 10. That would mean, 150 messages per minute. So, I try to become very strict in sort of, I can't answer now, I'll get back to you when it is. And it's important to take care of yourself. That I've learned very late, but it's important. And to put some boundaries. How I do that, I don't know. I try to carve out time when I can. But it's very important. It's a good question.
Yeah. But also, that's, I think, one of the advantages of getting older, having more experience, because you become a little more efficient, as you were saying, like when you start your career as you're moving on. So you get a little better also as time goes on at managing time or cutting, like you said, you know, creating, because the boundary thing is not easy, especially when you're starting your career, right?
No, at all.
You know, you eat, sleep, and I know. I had to refuse WhatsApp. I said to client, no, they wanted to put hotel projects with all the consultants on WhatsApp. And I said, no way. I'm going to receive calls and, you know, messages at 4 a.m. on a Sunday because in Singapore, no. So you're right about the boundaries. But not when you're young. When you're starting off, no boundaries, okay? Only when you get older is the consolation of growing older.
But it's good not to give up everything for the job. Like, you know, I think, like I said, I rushed a lot to like get forward and ahead. And then I didn't do a lot of things that now I thought that could have been nice, you know, see a bit more friends sometimes. And as long as you're focused when you're working and you really do it well, then it's good also to like have a life.
Okay.
Didn't do much of that.
Okay. Is there any other questions? Oh,
We have a second. Oh,
sorry. Are we okay with time? Yeah.
yeah.
Here
No, we
have
just have a
question
second
here.
question online, but yeah. Just do you.
Okay. Do you want to do the online or?
Whatever you go, you're here.
We give priority to who's here.
Just listening to the talk, and you had mentioned about AI. I wanted to know what are your thoughts about AI. Do you think it's going to be a threat to the designers, or it's going to be helpful for us in the future, since now it is becoming too much, like people are too much into it and like getting a lot of support from AI regarding the designs and everything?
I think that if you use it as a helpful tool, it's great. So you need to produce something quickly and you have a very clear idea what you want and you need to support, you know, at the time, it can be very helpful. To delegate is a terrible idea to AI. You know, you won't get what you need and you need to be the backbone and sort of use it as a guiding tool. I don't know how it will develop into the future. The idea terrifies me that a machine will tell me like what the best whatever is to do anything. But I hope that it will stay that way, like as a sort of helpful thing that you can get when you're really under pressure to deliver something. You can use that. I'm also of the idea that it's a very wrong approach to allow a client to dictate too strict times. So that's another boundary that's important to set. Like, this deadline is not realistic. I won't perform well. You need to give me 2 more weeks, otherwise it's going to be terrible. And, you know, to have the time, like not always give in to, okay, I needed it for yesterday. Yeah, okay, that's your problem, really, not mine, because you came to me today. So give me more time and I won't use AI and it will be better and we will all be happy.
No, it's true about the deadline. I think it's really important to be honest and upfront.
Yeah.
Because again, it's building the trust. So, you know, if you tell a client, no, I can't give you a quality of work. If you make me do it in 2 days when I really need 2 weeks to do it, there's no way I can give you the quality you're expecting. Yeah. And I think at the end, clients respect that much more than saying, yeah, I'll do it. And then the result is so-so. Yeah. Okay, you want to do the other one online?
I feel that you've already mentioned this somehow, but probably there's more details to give. Okay, so you've emphasized that luxury does not necessarily need to appear expensive, but should be unique. Considering the interior industry's challenges with resource depletion and sustainability, where do you see the future of luxury interiors heading? In this fast-changing design environment driven by trends, how do you approach creating designs that endure and remain relevant over time?
Yeah, so I think we did touch a little bit on that in the sense that always look at the architectural context and try to do something that doesn't break, if you're doing a restoration, that is, too much from what there already is, because then it will be a testimony of its time and tell that story forward, you know. To be respectful of what there was before. I think it's not so necessary to do a lot of new build today. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. So I am always pro reusing rather than doing new. There's a lot of bad new quality also that comes out on the market. So where you can reuse and be respectful of what there was, I think that will be a good test of time.
But I think the level of quality, you know, if you have details that are really high level of quality, they're more durable.
Yeah.
So in reality, depending on, of course, on materials and other factors, but in a way, it's more sustainable than saying you do something that then will be changed and knocked down, and so.
Yeah.
So it's a
Like
fine
watch out for trends, as well.
which is not easy
No.
for the Google generation. I think that's an important takeaway that we're getting today. Okay, is there any other questions? Yeah.
A lot.
Thanks for the talk.
Oh.
Thank you for the talk. What I wanted to understand is that you just told us about managing 40 sites right now, and design being an industry where you are personally very involved, and the project that you get is based on your identity. Do you think the studio should supersede the identity of the founding designer to be able to scale in a manner that you can manage so many projects, because every person has their own limitations as to managing a site or design?
Yeah, it's a good question too. It's hard. We have people in the office that have worked with us now for 10 years or so. Okay. And in the end, you tend to create a common language together. So, which is very nice. There's a very strong common trust between the workers that we have, between the architects that we have that have been working with us for a long time. Of course, to scale up, what's hard for us is that we do tend to control, or David wants to see a lot of the drawings, and that's hard when there's a lot of sites going on. But there's also that trust that gets built over time, which is reciprocal, so them to us and us to them. And I'm all for delegating and giving also their input and their expression on how they would do something, because any conversation will make a project better. Like one person will not be able to perform better than three. There's no way, I think, And it's important, if you really want to scale up, I never want to be an office more than 15 people, because then it's really hard to, just in general, it's not so much about control, it's just management becomes really hard. And what happens is that the clients, they tend to want your connection, whether it's me or David, because it gives them a type of security. But in the end, they tend to get very close to the project manager because they're totally capable of leading it forward. I don't know if that's answered your question, but sort of. Yeah.
And are there any specific guidelines that you follow from the very start of your practice that help you scale up later on, maybe management?
Any guidelines that we help us scale up?
What do you mean scale up? Scale up the company, you mean, in terms of size?
Some principles that you incorporate in the very beginning, that maybe this design has to be this way, you create all the designs beforehand, or...
Yeah, I guess it's more about how the team is constructed. So a new project will always have a project manager that's worked with us before, and the younger one, or not younger, but that has worked with us less time, will accompany one with more experience in our office, even if they're more senior, you could say, so that they learn how we do things and they see, and that makes it easier because on the next project, they will become project manager. So then you can sort of scale up. But as mentioned, I would like to keep it relatively small because it just feels also more manageable, back to the work-life balance. Like when you go over 15, which is already, it's small, but it's a lot. When you exceed that, then you're in a very heavy ball game. And it also involves an immense amount of traveling, management of people. Yeah, in general, it's quite...
I definitely agree. When I had the office here, I had 15 maximum, and that was like...
That's a good limit.
Yeah, I agree, because then it just becomes more about management and running after your tail.
And a business, less about creating.
And that's not easy, because that's often, a lot of firms, when they start being successful, the tendency is to grow, and sometimes they grow too fast, and then the quality of the work goes down. So if you want to keep your niche market of the quality and the high level of luxury, I think it's important to have, a clear idea on that approach. Okay, is there any other questions? Did you have one? No? No? Karina? No, only if you have a question. You don't have to. Oh.
It's totally fine. So I had a lecture the other day about luxury and like retail. And he said basically when you work with bigger companies, the idea of a concept kind of slowly dies off to be part of the brand. And how do you find that when you're working with upstarting companies? Like nothing like it's still a luxury brand, but it's not like a heritage brand. Like, do you find this loss coming up?
Well, it has a lot to do with storytelling. So they, even though if it's an up and coming brand, but it's within the luxury world, it's important they tell the story really well, so that their branding needs to be very solid. And then you can weave in your design very easily into that. Even if it's all very new and doesn't have a ton of history, it doesn't matter, because if it's a very coherent brand where every detail is well thought out, it will come through in every aspect of the design. If it's not, then they have a lot of other issues compared to the store, I think, eventually when they start building.
Okay. Are there any last closing questions? I imagine it's time. No more? Elisa, online? No, we're okay? Okay. So, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Personally, I thought it was really interesting and enlightening, and I really, I liked I would hire you if I had a project. No, and I'm being honest. And I'm being honest. If I wasn't a designer, of course, and I had to do my own house, no, I would hire you because I really like your approach about what we were saying before, design empathy and understanding the client. Yeah. And it's not about you and your ego and your design style.
No.
And I think that's such an important factor, and especially moving forward, the human aspect. And, we don't talk about that. We talk about how we're good at this and we're good at that and we can do 3D and we can do that. But the human aspect is fundamental.
Yes. I think I spoke a lot about how brilliant David is, which is good.
Yeah, because you're filmed on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. But I have to say that if there wasn't a lot of sympathy and a lot of accompanying the client and understanding what they want, we would get half of the projects that we do, probably.
So your input is important in the...
At some point,
of course,
yes.
Of course. Okay. Okay, so thank you very much. And thanks for everybody for coming, even though there was a strike.
Thank you.
And let's give a round of applause.